Hello everyone. So now we are starting the topic of wave optics. This is the first hour. There will be 2 hours. Now kids, we need to understand that wave optics is a heavyweight topic. 3 questions come from here as a trend in your NEET examination. And these 3 questions are divided category wise. One comes from interference, one comes from diffraction and one comes from polarization. Usually students find diffraction tough. But believe me, the question coming from diffraction are very straightforward and easy. The difficult question, if it may come, will be from interference. Now, in this hour, we are going to deal with interference and we will talk about diffraction and polarization in the next hour. It is my suggestion that you must read NCERT of this particular topic because it's a heavyweight, 3 questions and a small topic compared to its weightage. Think of how big rotational is, how big electrostatic is. Though they are important to cover the whole mechanics and electrodynamics in totality, but even then, wave optics, a single topic, has got weightage of 3 questions. So that's why you should put your energy and time on this particular topic. So without wasting time, let's start the topic of wave optics. And the first thing we are going to talk about is Huygens principle. And to understand Huygens principle, we need to understand something called wavefront. So what exactly is wavefront? We first need to know it was suggested by Mr. Huygens himself. The wavefront is collection of all the points which are in same phase. If you have listened to the topic of wave, I said that when you have a source, the source creates a disturbance. The disturbance always moves away from the source. And if you think of 2 points, a point closer to the source and point away from the source, then the point away from the source will always lag in phase compared to the point closer to the source. So if I ask out of point A and B, which one will have higher phase, you will say that the phase of A has to be greater than the phase of B. Now, what exactly is wavefront? Wavefront is locus or collection of all the points vibrating in the same phase. So collection of all the points which are vibrating in the same phase is called a wavefront. Just like collection of all the points which have the same potential is called equipotential surface. Here we say the collection of all the points which vibrate in the same phase are called wavefronts. Now there is more to the similarity between them. When you move in direction of electric field, the potential decreases. If you have a source and the source is giving out signals, so it's creating disturbances. As you keep on moving away and away and away from the source, the phase you will find is lesser and lesser and lesser. So if there are 3 points A, B and C, I can say that at any given instant of time, the phase of A will be greater than the phase of B and that will be greater than the phase of C. There is one more similarity. While teaching you equipotential surfaces, I said that if you have an equipotential surface, it means that all the points on this surface are at same potential. So the direction of electric field at any point on the equipotential surface is perpendicular to the surface, is normal to the surface. Similarly, if you have a wavefront, then at any point the direction of propagation of light is perpendicular, is normal to the wavefront. So the third point, the direction of propagation of light is perpendicular to the wavefront. See how similar things in physics are. So what are wavefronts? Collection of all the points which vibrate in the same phase, and the direction of propagation of light is normal to the wavefront. Now let's talk about some types of wavefronts, just like we talked about some type of equipotential surfaces. There I said if you have a point charge, then the type of equipotential surfaces you get are concentric spheres. Here we say if you have a point source of light, it will give out light in 3 dimensions. On your screen you can see a 2D figure, but better think in 3 dimensions. So from this point source, light will come out in all directions. And we will get which type of wavefronts. So for point sources, the type of wavefronts we will get will be concentric spheres. So the type of wavefronts we will get will be spherical wavefronts. If rather than having point source of light, if we have a line source of light, then for a line source of light we get cylindrical wavefronts sharing a common axis. And if we have got parallel rays of light. So we know that the wavefront has to be perpendicular to the direction of propagation. So these type of parallel wavefronts we will get. So if you have got parallel rays of light, then the wavefronts are also parallel planes. Now let's understand the Huygens principle. What does Huygens principle say? To understand it, assume that you have a point source. Okay. And rather than thinking of light coming out in all directions, we will just focus on light moving in one direction. So focus on the light moving towards right. So if these are the light rays coming out of the point source and moving towards right, we can think of a wavefront. Now the type of wavefront due to these rays will be something like this. Now each point on this wavefront will be in the same phase. Now we call this, let's say, as primary wavefront. What does Huygens principle say? And this statement is important. The statement goes like, every point on a given wavefront acts as a secondary source. What? Here I have a point source, yeah, light comes out of it and we get a wavefront. And now sir, you are saying that every single point on this given wavefront acts as a secondary source. So there are infinite points on this given wavefront. So are we going to have infinite number of secondary source? Yes. Every point on a given wavefront acts like a secondary source. Now visualize few sources here more. If you visualize these sources, let's say they look like this by these small red dots. If they are sources, they will also emit light. Yes. Now you might think that they will emit light in all directions. Disregard all the waves you are thinking coming in the backward direction. Only focus on the light rays moving in the forward direction. And when all these light rays coming out of these wavefronts will superimpose, you will get one new wavefront, and that will be called the secondary wavefront. So these secondary sources produce waves active in the forward direction, in the direction of propagation. And the superposition of these waves gives rise to the next wavefront, and that is what we will call the secondary wavefront. So what do we need to understand, sir, here? Two simple points. First, every point on a wavefront acts like a secondary source. Yes. And these secondary sources are active in forward direction. Now think that light is coming out of each single point here, and the superposition of all the radiation coming out in forward direction gives you another wavefront, and that is called the secondary wavefront. Now the important points that we should remember. The first point, wavefront always travel in forward direction of the medium. So disregard if you are thinking any rays of light coming out of these secondary source in the backward direction. Second point, light ray is always normal to the wavefront. This is something we have already discussed, and this is in synchronization in what we have learned about equipotential surfaces and the direction of electric field. The third point goes like, the phase difference at different points on a wavefront is zero. Isn't this obvious? The definition of wavefront is the collection of all the points which are in same phase. So if I get a wavefront and I ask you, out of all these points, if I think of only 2 points, let's say point X and point Y, what will be the phase difference of the vibration between point X and Y? You will say, sir, 0, because they are in same phase, and that is your third point. Now we are moving to the important part, and that is principle of superposition, that will tell us how does interference takes place. So when two or more than two waves superimpose over each other at a common particle. So particle, we are learning light. Light doesn't require a particle. Okay, I am explaining here using the string waves. Okay, so think that what I am teaching right now is for string waves, and that same theory works even for light. So when two or more than two waves superimpose over each other at a common particle. So think that you have got a string. Somebody created first pulse, then somebody created second pulse, and when both these pulse reaches a point, the first pulse want this particle to go up, let's say by some distance y1, and the second pulse want this particle to go down by some distance y2. Now where will you find the particle finally? So we say that we will get the final position of the particle from the vector summation of the displacement as wished by these two waves independently. So then the resultant displacement of the particle is equal to the vector sum of the displacements y1 and y2. So the net displacement will be nothing but the vector sum of individual displacement because of both the signals. So we say that the net displacement y will be nothing but the sum of individual displacements y1 and y2. To understand it better, let's take some example. Let's think of case 1, that at a particular point on the string, the first disturbance wants an upward displacement of y1 and the second disturbance want an upward displacement of y2. If first wave want an upward displacement of y1 and the second wave want an upward displacement of y2, then you will say that the net displacement will be in upward direction and that will be equal to y1 plus y2. You can understand it using graphs as well. So if let's say the first vibration looks like this and the second vibration looks like this, then when they are superimposed, then you will get a resultant vibration which will be nothing but the vector sum of these two vibrations. So that will be the resultant of these two. So we will say that waves are meeting at a point in same phase. So what is the meaning of waves are meeting at the point in same phase? The crest of first meets the crest of second. The trough of first meets the trough of second. This is the meaning of waves are meeting at a point in same phase. Similarly, if the first wave want the displacement to be in upward direction y1 and the second wave want the displacement to be in downward direction y2, then the resultant displacement will be y1 minus y2. This can even be understood in terms of graphs. So if you think of the displacement at all points due to the first disturbance, and if you think the displacement at all points due to the second disturbance, then the resultant will be nothing but their vector sum. Now here do understand that due to the first one positive, due to the second one negative, so you net get positive minus negative. And here one thing that you need to understand is waves are meeting at a point out of phase. When we say that waves are meeting at a point out of phase, it means that you can see that the crest of one superimposes with the trough of another. When this type of situation takes place, we say that there is a phase difference of pi or odd multiple of pi. Odd multiple of pi I will explain little later. Now let's move on and talk about what is phase difference, what is path difference, and what is time difference. So here, first thing, what is phase? The argument of the sine or cosine in the expression for displacement of a wave is defined as the phase. So for example, if the equation of simple harmonic motion is given by y equals to a sine omega t, then the input of the trigonometric function is called the phase. So omega t is the phase or instantaneous phase angle. This is the first thing. So the input of the trigonometric function represents the phase. Second thing, bachcho, what is phase difference? The name itself says phase difference, the difference in the phase. So what is phase difference? The difference between two phases of two waves at a point is called phase difference. If the first equation is given by y1 equals to a1 sine omega t and the second disturbance has equation y2 equals to a2 sine omega t plus phi. So the phase difference is nothing but the difference in the phase. The phase of second disturbance is omega t plus phi. The phase of first disturbance is omega t. So their difference is nothing but omega t plus phi minus omega t, that gives you phi. So the phase difference has to be equal to phi. The next thing, what is the meaning of path difference? Keep this particular thing in mind. When let's say you have got a string, okay, fixed at one end, free at other end, and you connect a source here, and the source performs simple harmonic motion. When the source completes one cycle, means the source moves from mean to positive extreme, back to mean to negative extreme, back to mean. When the source completes one cycle, then the disturbance moves on the string by a length lambda. So you need to understand that when the phase of the source changes by 2 pi, when the phase of the source changes by 2 pi, in one complete cycle, the phase changes by 2 pi angle. So when the phase of the source changes by 2 pi, the disturbance propagates forward by a distance lambda. So if let's say you have a source and wave is coming out of it, and there are 2-3 points as the wave goes away. Think of a point A, think of a point B, think of a point C. If the separation between A and B is lambda and the separation between B and C is lambda, then you will say that in a length lambda, the phase changes by 2 pi. So at this particular instant, the phase of A minus the phase of B will be 2 pi. In a length lambda, the phase changes by 2 pi. Since the separation between A and C is 2 lambda, in a length 2 lambda, the phase will change by 4 pi. So you will say that the phase at A minus the phase at C equals to 4 pi. Similarly, if you have a source and let's say EM wave is coming out of it, and think of 3 points, a point A, a point B, and a point C. Let's say the separation between A and B is lambda by 2, while the separation between A and C is 5 lambda. Now question is, what is the phase difference between A and B? So you will say that the phase at A minus the phase at B will be equal to how much? In a length lambda, the phase changes by 2 pi. So in a length lambda by 2, the phase will change by pi. In a length lambda, the phase changes by 2 pi. So in a length lambda by 2, the phase will change by pi. So the phase at A minus the phase at B will be equal to pi. Similarly, what will be the phase difference between A and C? So you will say that the phase difference between A and C. In a length lambda, the phase changes by 2 pi. So in a length 5 lambda, the phase will change by 10 pi. This is so easy. Now I ask you one question. There is a source and the source creates EM wave that is moving away from the source. Disturbance always move away from the source. Now let's say you have got 2 points A and B separated by distance x. Can you tell me what will be the phase difference between these 2 points? So here we can use unitary method. We will say that in a length lambda, the phase changes by 2 pi. So in a length delta x, the phase will change by how much? So from unitary method, you will say that the phase will change by delta x by lambda into 2 pi. So in a length lambda, the phase changes by 2 pi. So in a length delta x, the phase will change by how much? Delta x by lambda into 2 pi. You need to remember this thing. Now bachcho, the difference in the path length of two waves meeting at a point is called path difference. The name itself is path difference. The difference in the path length is called path difference between two waves at that point. Now, what is the correlation between path difference and phase difference? We say that the path difference is equals to lambda upon 2 pi into the phase difference. I have just written here that the phase difference will be equals to the path difference upon lambda into 2 pi. If you rearrange it, you will get that the path difference equals to delta phi by 2 pi into lambda, and that's what is written here. Now personally, I remember this thing as the path difference upon maximum possible path difference in one complete cycle. In one complete cycle, the disturbance moves forward by a distance lambda. So path difference upon maximum possible path difference in one complete cycle equals to the phase difference upon the maximum possible phase change in one complete cycle. I remember it this way. All are one and the same thing. It's just, managing it here and there. So now let's talk about the next thing, that is time difference. At the same point, when the disturbance propagates, as the time changes, the x coordinate doesn't change, but the phase keeps on changing. So as the phase keeps on changing, can you tell me how much phase will change in a time t? So we have defined a quantity called angular frequency. What is angular frequency? Angular frequency is the rate of change of phase angle with respect to time. The rate of change of phase angle with respect to time is the angular frequency. So we can say d phi equals to omega dt. Integrating both the side, we can say that the phase difference is nothing but omega t. So at a given point, at a given value of x, even when the time keeps on changing, the phase of that point keeps on changing, and in a time t, the phase changes by omega t. I have already told you guys while teaching waves, always think of omega as angular frequency, and that is the rate of change of phase with respect to time. So remember this, in a time t, the phase changes by an amount equals to omega t. Because that is the definition of angular frequency, the rate of change of phase angle with respect to time. Now बच्चों, talking about resultant amplitude. If suppose we have two waves given by equation y1 equals to a1 sin omega t and y2 equals to a2 sin omega t plus phi, where a1 and a2 are the amplitude and I1 and I2 are intensity of these individual waves. Now the question is, what will be the resultant amplitude? I think that we have done the phasor method so many times that you will already know what is going to be the resultant amplitude. To add these two up, you will take the amplitude as the magnitude of vector and the phase as the direction. So you will say that this first vibration can be treated as a vector in the direction of omega t having a magnitude a1, and the second signal can be thought of as a vector of magnitude a2 in direction of omega t plus phi. So think of one more vector of magnitude a2 in direction of omega t plus phi. And the resultant of these two, a1 and a2, will come out to be somewhere here. Now this A resultant is nothing but under root of a1 square plus a2 square plus 2a1 a2 cos phi, and you need to remember this. This has been told so many times. So after superposition of the given waves, the resultant amplitude is given by a equals to under root of a1 square plus a2 square plus 2a1 a2 cos phi. You need to remember this. So this is the resultant amplitude. Now there are some important cases that you should know. So for example, for the interfering wave, can you tell me what will be the resultant amplitude? Do these two waves have some phase difference? Yes or no? Yes sir, they have phase difference. Whenever you find the phase difference, the trigonometric function should be same. Sir, you have given one of them as sine and one of them as cos. Here you can't say that the phase difference is the difference in the phase omega t minus omega t 0. No, that will be wrong. So one is sine and one is cos. Rather than thinking of a2 cos omega t, you should think of y2 as a2 sine omega t plus pi by 2. Hence, there is a phase difference of pi by 2 between the two disturbances. So you will say that the phase difference between them is 90 degree, not 0. One is sine, one is cos, the phase difference is 90 degree. So the resultant amplitude is nothing but under root of a1 square plus a2 square plus 2a1 a2 cos 90. And we know that cos 90 is 0. Since cos 90 is 0, this whole third term becomes 0. So the resultant amplitude is nothing but under root of a1 square plus a2 square. Here, I'm not focusing that much on amplitude. I need to focus more on intensity. Now we need to talk about the resultant intensity. We know that for all three types of wave, whether you have string wave, whether you have sound wave, whether you have light wave, for all three types of wave, the intensity is proportional to amplitude square. I have just told you guys that the resultant amplitude is under root of a1 square plus a2 square plus 2a1 a2 cos phi, right? If I square it both the side, I get that a square equals to a1 square plus a2 square plus 2a1 a2 cos phi. Now bachcho, let's say the first source having an amplitude a1 has intensity I1. The second source having amplitude a2 has an intensity I2. And the resultant formed has an amplitude a and has one intensity I. We know that for all three types of wave, the intensity is proportional to amplitude square. So we know that intensity is proportional to amplitude square. So think of I1, the intensity of first wave, as some constant times a1 square. Think of the intensity of second wave I2 as some constant times a2 square. And think of the intensity of resultant I as some constant times resultant amplitude whole square. Now here, in place of resultant amplitude whole square, I can write resultant intensity by k. In place of a1 square, I can write I1 by k. In place of a2 square, I can write I2 by k plus 2. In place of a1, we can write root I1 by k. In place of a2, we can write root I2 by k into cos phi. Now you can see that you can cancel out k, and root k becomes k in the denominator. So what you get is I resultant equals to I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. And this is something that you should know by heart. So Hence, from the formula of resultant amplitude, we can get the following formula for resultant intensity. And the resultant intensity is nothing but I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. Once more, I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. You need to remember this formula. Now, bachcho, some important points. First, the term 2 root I1 I2 cos phi is called the interference term. Whether you will get high resultant intensity or low resultant intensity, it depends upon the phase difference between the two sources at the point of interference. Now, the phase difference is substituted here. So no matter which type of sources you have, these first two quantities can't change. The third quantity changes due to the change in the phase difference between the two sources superimposing. So this third term is called the interference term. For incoherent sources, what are incoherent sources? There are two types of sources. There are coherent sources and there are incoherent sources. Coherent sources are the one for which the phase difference remains constant. And incoherent sources are the one for which the phase difference keeps on changing with time. So now here, looking in the expression, you can say that for incoherent sources, this value phi will keep on changing with time. It won't be constant. So if you think of what will be the average intensity observed, you will say that the average intensity observed will be same as average value of I1 plus average value of I2 plus average value of 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. As the time keeps on changing, for incoherent sources phi keeps on changing, and if phi keeps on changing, cos phi keeps on changing. And if cos phi keeps on changing, what is the average value of cos theta in one complete cycle? I think that you guys know this by now. The average value of sin theta and cos theta over one complete cycle is 0. The average value of sin square theta and cos square theta over one complete cycle is half. Now, since you have got here cos phi, over one complete cycle, its average value will be 0. So over one complete cycle, this third term will be 0. So you know that resultant intensity is I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. Yes. For incoherent sources, this value phi keeps on changing. So if you need to find the average intensity, you will say that the average intensity is average value of I1 plus average value of I2 plus average value of 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. For one complete cycle, the average value of cos phi becomes 0. So for one complete cycle, this whole third term becomes equals to 0. And hence for two incoherent sources, you say that the resultant intensity is nothing but the sum of the intensity due to the two sources. So the resultant intensity is nothing but I1 plus I2, and this is what we observe in everyday life. If I ask you, you get inside a room, you turn on the switch 1, which is connected to first tube light, and then you turn on the switch 2, which is connected to second tube light. On turning both of them on, the resultant intensity adds up, and to everyday life usage, it appears that they add up just by magnitude. So if at one point in the room, the intensity due to the first source is I1 and the intensity due to the second source is I2, then when you turn both of them on, the resultant intensity at that point appears to be I1 plus I2. This is our everyday observation, right? And it's true because two independent sources are incoherent. The phase difference between the wave produced by them is not constant. So just remember that if you have got incoherent sources, the sources for which the phase difference is not constant, for such sources, the resultant intensity will be nothing but I1 plus I2. Moving on. Now let's talk about what are coherent sources and what are incoherent sources. So first, coherent sources. The sources of light which emit continuous light waves of same wavelength, same frequency, and in the same phase or having a constant phase difference are called coherent sources. So two sources of light which produce continuous light wave of same wavelength, same frequency, and in the same phase or having a constant phase difference. So if the phase difference remains constant, do understand that you will say that the sources are coherent. If at a point the phase difference do not change with time, you will say that the sources are coherent. Second point, beta. Two sources of light whose frequencies are not same and the phase difference between the waves emitted by them does not remains constant with respect to time, they are called non-coherent or incoherent. So if the phase difference remains constant, they are called coherent. If the phase difference keeps on changing, you call them incoherent or non-coherent sources. Next point, the light emitted by two independent sources. For the example I just took, that in a room you have got two independent tube lights. So the light emitted by two independent sources, candles or bulbs or tube lights, is non-coherent. An interference phenomenon cannot be observed for such two sources. So you can't observe the interference phenomenon given that the phase difference is not constant. And if you have got two independent sources, then they are bound to be non-coherent until they are produced by laser. Because however, two independent laser lights can be coherent because laser is a highly precise mechanism of producing light. So for two independent lasers, still you can have coherent light. But do understand that the light emitted by two independent sources, candle, bulb, tube light, they can't be coherent. Now moving on, constructive interference and destructive interference. What is the meaning of constructive interference? We know that the resultant intensity is nothing but I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. In our everyday life, we observe that the resultant intensity is nothing but I1 plus I2. Because in our everyday life, the type of sources we are working with, they are non-coherent. Since they are non-coherent, the phase difference keeps on changing and the average intensity we observe is nothing but the algebraic sum of individual intensity. Now, what is the meaning of constructive interference? Constructive interference means that the resultant intensity should be greater than the sum of individual intensity. So if the resultant intensity at a point comes out to be more than I1 plus I2, then you will say that it is constructive interference. For constructive interference to take place, for the resultant intensity to be greater than the individual sum, this third quantity should be positive. And for this 2 root I1 I2 cos phi to be positive, you will say that cos phi has to be positive. And for cos phi to be positive, the phase angle should lie either in first quadrant or in the fourth quadrant. It means that the phase difference between the two waves should have a magnitude less than 90 degree. The phase difference between the two waves should have a magnitude less than 90 degree. So the phase difference should lie either in first quadrant or should lie in fourth quadrant. So what is the condition for constructive interference? If the resultant intensity is greater than individual sum, if I resultant is more than I1 plus I2, you will say that the two waves are showing constructive interference, and for constructive interference, 2 root I1 I2 cos phi should be positive. For this, cos phi should be positive, so phi must lie in the first quadrant or in the fourth quadrant. Now bachcho, for maximum possible resultant intensity, what will you say? Sir, if you want maximum possible resultant intensity, then this quantity cos phi should be equal to 1. Yeah. And cos phi is 1 for which value of phi? So we know that cos 0 is 1, and then sir cos 90 is 0, cos 180 is minus 1, cos 270 is 0, cos 360 is 1. So which other value of phi you get cos phi to be 1? So cos 360 is 1. So rather than thinking of 360, think of 2 pi. So cos 2 pi is 1. And then sir cos of 720 degree, cos of 4 pi is 1. So you will say that to get the maximum possible resultant intensity, the value of phi, the phase difference, should be either 0 or 2 pi or 4 pi or 6 pi or 8 pi and so on. So you will say that the phase difference has to be 2n pi, even multiple of pi. 2n is always an even number. So 2n pi means even multiple of pi. Sir, do I have to mug this up? No beta, it's very easy. Every time I am adding up two waves, which method am I using? Sir, you are using something called phasor method. Okay. And in phasor method, what do I treat the disturbances? You treat the disturbances as vectors. Good. If I tell you beta, you have to make two displacements, one of 5 meter, one of 3 meter. I am saying the word displacement. you have to make two displacements, one of 5 meter, one of 3 meter, and you want the resultant displacement to be maximum. What has to be the angle between the two displacement? So sir, I will move 5 meter forward, and then if I go here 3 meter, there will be less displacement. If I go here, there will be less net displacement. If I want maximum possible net displacement, then both the displacement of 5 meter and 3 meter should be in the same direction. Then I will be farthest away from my initial point, and the length will be 8 meter, right? So if you want the resultant possible amplitude to be maximum, because intensity proportional to amplitude square, if the resultant possible amplitude will be maximum, the resultant possible intensity will be maximum. And for that maximum possible resultant intensity, you will try to have these two signals to be in the same phase, to point in the same direction, so that they can be added up. And to point in the same direction, the phase difference can be 0 or 2 pi or 4 pi or 6 pi or 8 pi, that is even multiple of pi. So beta, understand that for maximum possible resultant intensity, the phase difference between the two superimposing waves have to be 0 or 360 or 720. Think using the phasor method. Now beta, the path difference has to be how much? That if the phase difference has to be 0 or 2 pi or 4 pi or 6 pi or 8 pi. We know that in a path difference lambda, the phase difference is 2 pi. When source completes one cycle, the phase changes by 2 pi and the disturbance propagates forward by a distance lambda. So in a length lambda, the phase changes by 2 pi, right? So when the phase changes by 0, the path changes by 0. When the phase changes by 2 pi, the path length has to be lambda. When the phase changes by 4 pi, the path difference has to be 2 lambda. When the phase changes by 6 pi, the path difference has to be 3 lambda, and so on. So you will say that the path difference has to be nothing but n lambda. It has to be either 0 or lambda or 2 lambda or 3 lambda or 4 lambda. It has to be just an integral multiple of lambda. So what has to be the path difference? N lambda. Next thing, bachcho. Resultant amplitude at the point of observation will be maximum. Yeah, if you are getting the maximum possible resultant intensity, you will get the maximum possible resultant intensity when you have the maximum possible resultant amplitude. And that maximum possible resultant amplitude will be nothing but when both on the phasor diagram point in the same direction. So you will say that A1 plus A2 will be your maximum possible resultant amplitude. But if both of them have the same amplitude, if A1 equals to A2, if two waves are superimposing whose amplitude is same, then what will be the maximum possible resultant amplitude? So you will say, let's say the amplitude of first wave is same as the amplitude of second wave, and let's say this amplitude is A0. Then when they superimpose, the maximum possible resultant amplitude will be A0 plus A0 when the phase difference between them is 0, 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi or 8 pi, when they both point in the same direction. Then you will say that the maximum possible resultant amplitude is nothing but 2A0. Now what's your next thing? The resultant intensity at the point of observation will be maximum when phi will be equals to 0 or even multiple of pi. Now what will be this maximum possible resultant intensity equal to? So you will say that the maximum possible resultant intensity will be when the value of cos phi becomes maximum possible value, and the maximum possible value of cos phi is 1. So you will say that the maximum possible resultant intensity is nothing but I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2. I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2. Now rather than thinking of I1, think of it as root I1 whole square. Rather than thinking of I2, think of it as root I2 whole square. And this third term is 2 times under root of I1 under root of I2. So think of this whole expression as a square plus b square plus 2ab. If you have got a square plus b square plus 2ab, you can write it as a plus b whole square. So you can write the maximum possible resultant intensity to be equals to root I1 plus root I2 whole square. You have to keep this in mind. The maximum possible resultant intensity is root I1 plus root I2 whole square. But personally, when a question comes to me, I always think in terms of amplitude, and then I start playing using the formula intensity proportional to amplitude square. Let's move on. If let's say the two sources have same intensity, just like we talked about, they have the same amplitude. If the two sources have same intensity, let's say the intensity of first source is same as the intensity of second source, and that is equals to I naught. Now can you tell me what will be the maximum possible resultant intensity? So sir, if both the sources have same intensity, then the maximum possible resultant intensity has to be nothing but under root of I naught plus under root of I naught whole square. Okay, that will be 2 root I naught whole square. 2 root I naught whole square will give you what? 4 I naught. So the maximum possible resultant intensity will be nothing but 4 times the individual intensity. The maximum possible resultant intensity will be nothing but 4 times the individual intensity, given that both the sources have equal intensity. Now bachcho, talking about destructive interference. For constructive interference, I said that when we write I resultant equals to I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. For constructive interference, the resultant intensity has to be greater than the individual sum. For this to happen, this third part should be positive. For destructive interference, the resultant intensity has to be less than the individual sum. And if you want that resultant intensity should be less than individual sum, then 2 root I1 I2 cos phi must be negative. If you want resultant intensity to be less than individual sum, 2 root I1 I2 cos phi must be negative. This means that cos phi must be negative. And for cos phi to be negative, the phase angle should lie in the second quadrant or in the third quadrant. Then only you will get the value of cos phi to be negative. So the condition is when the resultant intensity is less than the individual sum, then you say that these waves are showing destructive interference. Think of it this way. Alone, Ram can do X amount of work per day. Alone, Sham can do Y amount of work per day. When both of them collaborate, if they do more than X plus Y amount of work, you will say that they have interfered constructively, they are helping out each other. If after collaboration, the work done by them together is less than X plus Y, it means that you will say that no. They are interfering destructively. Individually, their sum of work is greater than when they are working together. So that's the basic idea behind constructive and destructive interference. Now beta, for minimum possible resultant intensity, if you want minimum possible resultant intensity, think from the formula I equals to I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. If you want minimum possible resultant intensity, what has to be the value of cos phi? So for minimum possible resultant intensity, the value of cos phi should be equal to minus 1, lowest possible value. And cos phi is minus 1 when? Cos 0 is 1, cos 90 is 0, cos 180 is minus 1, cos 270 is 0, cos 360 is 1. So for the cos, the dance goes like 1, 0, minus 1, 0, 1, 0, minus 1, 0, 1, 0, minus 1, 0. Now, for which value of phi, cos phi will be minus 1? So 180 degree. And. So think using the phasor. If you want the resultant intensity to be minimum, you want the resultant amplitude to be minimum. We have been adding the two waves like two vectors. If I ask you a simple question, you have to make two displacement of 5 meter and 3 meter. And you have to make them such that the net displacement is minimum possible magnitude. How will you make it? So you will say that, sir, I have to make two displacement of 5 meter and 3 meter and I want the resultant displacement to be minimum. So first I will go 5 meter forward, then I will come 3 meter backward, making my net displacement to be 2 meter, right? So for minimum possible resultant displacement, you will say that the two vectors should add up anti-parallel to each other as if they are trying to cancel out. And that is the basic idea behind having the minimum possible resultant amplitude and having the minimum possible resultant intensity. We know that the intensity is proportional to amplitude square. If you will have minimum possible resultant amplitude, you will end up getting minimum possible resultant intensity. Now, I ask you, if you have got two sources of amplitude 4 and 6, what can be the maximum possible resultant amplitude and what can be the minimum possible resultant amplitude? So you will say the maximum possible resultant amplitude will be when both the sources point in the same direction. So 4 and 6 in the same direction. and you will say that the A resultant will be equals to 10. For them to point in the same direction, the phase difference has to be 0, 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, 8 pi, even multiple of pi. If you want the minimum possible resultant amplitude, the two vectors should try to cancel out each other, and you will get the resultant amplitude equals to 2. And to get this resultant amplitude, the phase difference should be equals to pi, 3 pi, 5 pi, 7 pi, 9 pi, odd multiples of pi, as if both of them are trying to cancel out each other. Then you will get the minimum possible resultant amplitude. Now, bachcho, understand that if you have got two sources of amplitude 3 and 5, the maximum possible resultant amplitude will be 8. The minimum possible resultant amplitude is going to be 2. The maximum possible resultant amplitude will be 8. The minimum possible resultant amplitude will be 2. For maximum possible resultant amplitude, they should point in the same direction. So the phase difference should be 0, 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, 8 pi. And to get the minimum possible resultant amplitude, they should try to cancel out each other. So you get the resultant amplitude of 2. And for this, the phase difference has to be pi, 3 pi, 5 pi, 7 pi, 9 pi, and so on. Now, bachcho, for minimum possible resultant intensity, the value of phi should be 180 degree. This is one of the value. To cover all the values, we use a generic term 2n minus 1 into pi. See beta, 2n, always even. Always even. You have multiplied it with a 2. It's always going to be even. 2n minus 1. If you subtract 1 from an even number, you will add up getting an odd number. So 2n minus 1, always odd. So when I write that the phase difference has to be 2n minus 1 into pi, I am saying that the phase difference has to be odd multiple of pi. So that can be pi, 3 pi, 5 pi, and so on. Now, bachcho, here n can be anything 1, 2, 3, and so on. What has to be the path difference? We have learned that the phase difference upon maximum phase change in one cycle equals to path difference upon the maximum path difference in one cycle. So if you are saying for perfectly destructive interference, for the waves trying to cancel out each other's perfectly, the phase difference has to be 2n minus 1 into pi. So substitute 2n minus 1 into pi upon 2 pi equals to delta x by lambda, cancel out pi and pi, move the lambda up. So you get that the path difference has to be 2n minus 1 into lambda by 2. This has to be the path difference. Do understand, you get odd multiples of lambda by 2. 2n minus 1, always an odd number, multiplied by lambda by 2. So you are getting the path difference to be odd multiple of lambda by 2. So the path difference has to be either lambda by 2 or 3 lambda by 2 or 5 lambda by 2, odd multiple of lambda by 2. How to remember this? If you think of one wave, one long wave train, okay, what is the separation between one crest and one trough? So lambda by 2. What is the separation between this crest and the next trough? So 3 lambda by 2. What is the separation between this crest and the next trough? So you will say 5 lambda by 2. Think over it. If you want perfectly destructive interference, as if the two waves are trying to cancel out each other, the crest of one should try to match with the trough of other. So the path difference has to be lambda by 2, 3 lambda by 2, 5 lambda by 2, and so on. Nothing like rocket science that you can't remember. Understand that the resultant amplitude at the point of observation will be minimum. If you are getting minimum intensity, you must have minimum amplitude. The minimum amplitude will be nothing but the difference in individual amplitude. When we have written A1 minus A2, we have assumed that the amplitude of first one is greater than the amplitude of second one. Technically, you should place a mod here. Next, bachcho, if the amplitude of first is same as the amplitude of second, then you will say that the minimum possible resultant amplitude is 0. If you have got two forces of equal magnitude pointing in opposite direction, they will cancel out each other. So you will get minimum amplitude to be 0, given that both of them have the same amplitude. Now let's talk about resultant intensity. Resultant intensity at the point of observation will be minimum. We know that I resultant is nothing but I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. We are looking for minimum possible resultant intensity, and for minimum possible resultant intensity, this cos phi should be minus 1. So you will say I minimum will be I1 plus I2 minus 2 root I1 I2. I1 plus I2 minus 2 root I1 I2. In place of I1, you can think root I1 whole square. In place of I2, you can think root I2 whole square. Now, you can think of it as a square plus b square minus 2ab. And a square plus b square minus 2ab can be written as a minus b whole square. So, I minimum can be written as root I1 minus root I2 whole square. If both the sources have same intensity, to have same intensity, they need to have the same amplitude. If both the sources have same amplitude and intensity, then you will say that the minimum possible resultant intensity will be equals to root I naught minus root I naught. That becomes 0. So the minimum possible resultant intensity will be 0. So if both the sources have same intensity I naught, then the maximum possible resultant intensity 4 I naught and the minimum possible resultant intensity 0. If both the sources have same amplitude A naught, then the maximum possible resultant amplitude 2A naught and the minimum possible resultant amplitude is 0. Now let's talk more about resultant intensity due to two identical waves, and this is important. For two coherent sources, the resultant intensity is given by I equals to I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. For identical sources, the intensity has to be same. So let's say the intensity of first one is same as the intensity of second one equals to I naught. So you will say that resultant intensity is nothing but I naught plus 2 root I naught cos phi. So substitute I naught. Now here beta, you can write the resultant intensity as 4 I naught cos square phi by 2. Sir, how? See, if I write here in place of I1 and I2 I naught, what I will get is I naught plus 2 root I naught into cos phi. Yes, sir. This I naught plus I naught becomes 2 I naught. So you get 2 I naught. This 2 times of root I naught into root I naught gives you again 2 I naught cos phi. So you can take 2 I naught common. So you get 2 I naught times 1 plus cos phi. And 1 plus cos phi can be written as 2 cos square phi by 2. So in place of 1 plus cos phi, you can write 2 cos square phi by 2. So you get 2 I naught times 2 cos square phi by 2. So what we get is 4 I naught cos square phi by 2. So 1 plus cos theta can be written as 2 cos square theta by 2. Hence we get the resultant intensity as 4 I naught cos square phi by 2. Now kids, tell me, what can be the maximum possible value of cos square something? 1. What can be the minimum possible value of cos square something? 0. What is the average value of cos square function over one complete cycle? Half. So do understand here. For perfectly constructive interference, that is the phase difference being 0, 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, 8 pi, when the resultant intensity is maximum, if you substitute here 0, what will you get? 4 I naught into cos square 0, cos 0 is 1, so you simply get 4 I naught, and that's what we said. If you have got two sources of equal intensity I naught and I naught, then the resultant intensity will be 4 I naught. If they are trying to cancel out each other, when the two waves try to interfere perfectly destructively, then their phase should point in opposite direction. So the phase difference has to be pi, 3 pi, 5 pi, odd multiple of pi. So 180 or 3 times of 180, 540 degree and so on. Now, if you substitute here phase angle as 180 degree, you get the resultant intensity to be 4 I naught into cos square of 180 by 2, and 180 by 2 is 90. So you get 4 I naught cos square 90, and cos square 90 is 0, so you get 0. So what are you trying to establish here, sir? The maximum intensity is 4 I naught. The minimum intensity is 0. I have got one doubt. What? Sir, you are saying that if you have got two sources of same intensity I naught, and they reach a point, and they reach a point such that they are interfering perfectly constructively, then the resultant intensity is 4 I naught. So the first source at this point has got intensity I naught, second source at this point has got intensity I naught, and the resultant intensity you are getting is 4 I naught. So this betrays the law of physics. Using lesser energy, you are creating more energy. How is this even possible? Do understand that interference can even be thought of as redistribution of energy. Think of it this way. At every place, if no interference takes place, the energy due to the first source will be I naught, the second source will be I naught, and if they are not at all interfering, the net energy at every place will be 2 I naught. But when interference takes place, at the position of constructive interference, the energy increases and becomes 4 I naught. And at the position of destructive interference, where they perfectly cancel out each other, the intensity becomes 0. Again, at constructive site, you get 4 I naught, destructive site, you get 0, constructive site, you get 4 I naught, destructive site, you get 0. So, sir, what are you trying to say here? Do understand that interference is nothing but redistribution of energy. The places where constructive interference is taking place, the resultant intensity becomes more than individual sum. The places where destructive interference is taking place, the resultant intensity becomes less than individual sum. And if you even take the average value of cos square phi by 2 over one complete cycle, the average value of cos square is half. So you will say that the average intensity over one complete cycle will be 4i into half the average value of cos square phi by 2. That gives you 2 I naught. So do understand that at the site of constructive, the resultant intensity comes out to be 4 times of that of individual. At site of destructive, you get 0. But the average energy is same as the total. Now moving on, bacho. Important points. The first important point, I think I have already explained it. In interference, redistribution of energy takes place in the form of maxima and minima. So do understand that the energy can't be created nor destroyed. It's just that the energy gets redistributed. So at some point we find the resultant intensity to be more than individual sum, and at some point we find the resultant intensity to be less than individual sum. Second, the average intensity is nothing but I1 plus I2. Sir, why are you saying that the average intensity is I1 plus I2? Better, the intensity is what? I1 plus I2 plus 2 root I1 I2 cos phi. If you look at the average intensity at all points, you will take the average of everything here. When you take the average value of something constant I1, you get I1. When you take the average of something constant I2, you get I2. But when you take the average of this part here, the phase difference keeps on changing. And over one complete cycle, the average value of cos phi is 0. That's why, beta, the average intensity has to be nothing but I1 plus I2. So the average intensity is I1 plus I2. Next point. The ratio of maximum to minimum intensity. When the two waves have superimposed, what is the maximum possible resultant intensity? So sir, if first one has I1 and the second one has I2, we have just learned that the maximum possible resultant intensity will be root I1 plus root I2 whole square. And the minimum possible resultant intensity will be root I1 minus root I2 whole square. So when two waves are superimposing, the ratio of maximum to minimum resultant intensity is nothing but root I1 plus root I2 whole square upon root I1 minus root I2 whole square. So I max upon I minimum is root I1 plus root I2 whole square upon root I1 minus root I2 whole square. Do understand, kids? Intensity is proportional to amplitude square. So I can say that the maximum possible resultant intensity is proportional to the maximum possible resultant amplitude whole square. And the minimum possible resultant intensity is proportional to the minimum possible resultant amplitude whole square. The ratio of these intensity, the maximum possible resultant intensity upon the minimum possible resultant intensity, is equals to the maximum possible resultant amplitude whole square upon the minimum possible resultant amplitude whole square. If you have got two waves of amplitude A1 and A2 superimposing, the maximum possible resultant amplitude will be A1 plus A2 when they point in same direction, and the minimum possible will be A1 minus A2 when they point in opposite direction. So you will say that I max by I minimum can also be written as A1 plus A2 whole square upon A1 minus A2 whole square, as intensity is directly proportional to the amplitude whole square. So that's all for now. See you guys in the next hour.